Tornado warnings that have recently ended across eastern Ontario continue to be in effect across southern Quebec. I'm joined here by meteorologist Kevin McKay. This is kind of the first tornado watch of the season for Ontario. There's our locations. Maybe walk us through this setup and what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, it's our first watch for sure. We have had quite a few warnings in southwestern Ontario, but this is our first action in eastern Ontario and Quebec. The first tornado warning did issue on the south side of the Ottawa River. Hawkesbury was in that, Ottawa was not, and this is the line we're watching. So it had quite the alignment as it moved towards the 416. Now, what we've been dealing with a lot is just the wind gusts. This is all associated with the leading edge of the thunderstorms. Montreal, we've had a wind gust of 80 kilometers per hour, and that wasn't even associated with a thunderstorm. So there's our initial line has moved off into the Laurentian Mountains, but look what's in behind. That's a lot of moisture, a lot of heavy rain that we're going to continue to see move through eastern Ontario.
And Kev, when we're tracking severe thunderstorms, it's kind of a balance. You've got a strong low pressure system. That really kind of ticks a lot of boxes to develop a little bit of spin in the atmosphere. That's why our threat of tornadic activity, it's not exceptionally high. It's not a high-end event, but it's certainly non-zero. That's why Environment Canada and Climate Change has really issued this proactive tornado watch in effect for extreme eastern Ontario, Kingston along the 401. So I mentioned the dynamics with that low pressure system is fantastic. It's ticking a lot of boxes in terms of that. What's not ticking a lot of boxes is the amount of storm energy available with this system. You look at this warm sector, Kevin, this frontal system lifting north. What stands out to you in terms of the available energy here to really build these severe thunderstorms through the remainder of this afternoon?
Well, when we're looking at that gray on top of this yellow, that is all the cloud that we're dealing with in eastern Ontario. That's not going to allow the surface to get heated. It's not going to increase that instability which we normally see through the middle of the afternoon. So Ottawa, you're just getting above 1,000 joules of CAPE. So that's not ideal for strong, severe thunderstorms. So this is what we'd call a low energy, high shear environment, because you're saying, yes, that center of the low is actually over Algonquin right now. But if we go back to southwestern Ontario, where we had the storms go through in the morning, see getting into some of those oranges for London and Stratford. So we have more energy down there because we're already seeing the clouds start to break.
Well, if you're just joining our live stream in progress, thank you so much. We appreciate your viewership tremendously. And it was a wet morning, Kevin, through the GTA. We've already dealt with 2 rounds of thunderstorms. There was convection through the pre-dawn hours of Monday through downtown Toronto. So we've had multiple rounds that is starting to push some of the watershed levels up a little bit. We've had about 30 millimeters of rain through the GTA, and we're watching some thunderstorms attempt to push a round 3, believe it or not, across the area over the past 24 hours.
Yeah, you might have had an early wake-up call with some of the rain and the thunder through early Monday morning. But have a look at this. This is what we're expecting over the next, let's say, 6 hours. Now, to the left of the screen, look at that green and yellow. That is actually the back side of the low. That's where the air is coming in from northeastern Ontario. So that is going to get blocked up in upper Michigan. That's not going to wrap around to southern Ontario, but we are going to see that cloud cover. So what we're looking at right now in southwestern Ontario is a few cells that are starting to feed on all that instability around London that we were just looking at. So let's see how they're shaping up just as we speak. There you go, London to Sarnia. That is going to continue to trek towards Kitchener. Right now, there's not many signs that those are going to get any severe characteristics. What we're mostly looking at is just another round of, let's say, 20, 25 millimeters really quick, and that will be on top of what we've already seen. So this is a look at our radar-derived rainfall totals from the last 6 hours. You can see that streak through much of the GTA with that 20 to 30 millimeters, but London, you're also in that 20-ish. So if we can add on top of that, that's adding to an already saturated ground and a whole lot of saturated fields.
And we're keeping an eye on your live stream comments, particularly on the YouTube component of this. Notice that people talking about storms passing Ottawa, so just rain now. Is there any more instability, Kev, in the Ottawa Valley region that we could be dealing with another round of thunderstorms, especially those ones across eastern Ontario? Or is the atmosphere really overworked right now in terms of that rainfall really working to stabilize things?
Well, for the immediate, let's say next hour, it's not looking like we're going to get all this yellow between Kingston and Ottawa. That's not looking like it's going to have the ability to further develop into anything organized. So that's likely just going to be another hour of just heavy rain. But look, from Kingston to Cobourg and up to Bancroft, that actually has a lot of sunshine getting through there. So that will allow the air mass that's currently over the Kawarthas to destabilize, and that energy will shift towards the Ottawa Valley over the next few hours. So when we look at just what to expect over the next few hours, see around Barrie, those storms right now, those are already initiating. Now the question is, will those continue to feed on that little bit of clearing by the time we get to Ottawa? You see it's already 10 o'clock by the time they get to that area. That's not the ideal time to be feeding on surface level energy. So it's not looking like we're going to have another round of severe storms for Ottawa, but we are going to have to watch if anything does kind of come of this very heavy rain that we're going to see for the next hour or two.
And Kev, we've had a couple questions in and around the Montreal region. Now, this is a region that is kind of untapped for storm potential. We're kind of destabilizing the atmosphere as we speak. So we have a question from Kayla, an outlook specifically for the southern regions of Montreal. If you can kind of give us a bit of a future cast here over the next couple hours.
Well, let's see what we're dealing with right now. Yeah, the latest storms have actually gone to the north of Montreal, even though Montreal Trudeau Airport has reported a gust of 80 kilometers per hour. What you were looking at, Tyler, earlier was a lot of inverted instability down over the Appalachians and the Adirondacks just south of the border. So these storms that are back towards Watertown, we're going to have to keep an eye on those, anything along the 401 corridor and stateside. We'll see how those track through the Appalachians and dig into some of that inverted instability. That's where we could be looking at another round of strong wind over the next couple of hours, maybe even 3 or 4 by the time it gets to Montreal. So that could be almost ideal timing for early evening storms.
And let's check in with the power outage numbers by Hydro-Quebec and ON Power. Ontario's faring actually quite well. Only a couple thousand customers without power, but we've noticed a strong wind gust in excess of 80 kilometers an hour across Quebec. That has done a bit of a number on the power grid at this point. We're reporting right now around 60,000 customers and counting without power in and around Quebec. So the bulk of those are in the Montreal region, where about 30,000 customers are sitting in the dark right now. Thankfully, it's not oppressive heat, of course, so we're not dealing with an abscess of air conditioning, but we have to watch this next round of storms because this low pressure system has a low-level jet stream component to it. When winds just above the surface, we're not talking very high, maybe 400, 500, 600 meters, are sustained at 80, 90 kilometers an hour. So the atmosphere is very capable of transferring that momentum and those strong winds down to the surface. So that's why, wouldn't be shocking, you see it in the wording from Environment Canada, that we could be dealing with wind gusts in excess of 90 kilometers an hour. And that's kind of the threshold where we go from strong winds to damaging winds. So we're kind of teetering around that moment, Kevin.
Yeah, so if we're already talking about that level of power outages, this next line, the actual probably most potent line for Montreal between 7 and 8 o'clock, that will likely bring the strongest wind potential to Metro Montreal. So that will certainly jump up the power outages. But for the time being, that energy that we're going to be looking at still has a lot of work to do. So always my favorite thing to look at in Eastern Ontario is the influence of the Appalachians here. A big plateau and then the St. Lawrence Valley, Ottawa Valley on top of it. So this southerly flow coming up from New York, when it gets downsloping into the Cornwall, Montreal area and your storms are coming in from the west, that can add a kind of an extra give it some extra bonus points to what the storm is capable of. And that will be just in time for 7, 8 o'clock. So we'll see how that interacts. It doesn't have to be right at the surface like Tyler's saying. If it's just a few hundred meters above the surface, that can be enough to get some spin on any ascending air from the surface. So it's a good thing that we don't have a whole lot of clearing for the next few hours ahead of these cells, but we can still see some kind of internal energy from just the topography of Eastern Ontario.
And while Kevin's looking at radar, I'm looking at a product that is called velocity. So we're actually able to interpret how fast the winds and the direction of the winds that are traveling from these radar stations in Eastern Ontario. And we're tracking some very gusty winds right now east of Kingston along the 401, moving up the 401, Brockville up towards Cornwall. So those are the winds that Kevin mentioned will eventually bring stronger wind gusts across extreme Eastern Ontario and eventually back into the Metro Montreal region. That wind gust, 63 kilometers on the bottom left of your screen. That was from yesterday evening, where we actually had a marine tornado warning. I guess it would have been a water spout over Lake Erie. There was strong radar signature. So it just shows you just how dynamic this big Colorado low really is.
Yeah, this is also a great way to see where the center of the low is. So this is looking at your surfaced winds, those arrows that are circulating around counterclockwise, right? Looks like a funnel right over Sudbury. So that is where you want to first look at your wind directions if you're wanting to see if you're in somewhat of a tornado risk. Let's have a look here. So this is your surface wind, again, straight out of the south. But if you go just a kilometer or two above the surface, if you get a little bit more of a westerly component and then you go up, let's say 5, 6, 7 kilometers, and if it's coming right out of the west, that's where you get your uplift, your lifting of the instability, and it can start to rotate as it runs into different wind directions with heights. So there is still that bit of dynamic in this air mass, but as we go through the evening, that risk will certainly kind of take a step back.
And we have a couple questions localized across Eastern Ontario. I'm wondering if we can just give a little bit more insight on the tornadic potential in and around Smiths Falls. So Joanne, thank you so much for your question. You are officially in the tornado watch, so it's non-zero, but it's not exceptionally high. It's not a high-risk day. We're seeing a lot of cloud cover, really mitigating the instability. But we're going to have to watch really the next 2 hours. Once we can get through the next few hours, closer to that 5, 6 o'clock, you'll notice that tornado watch begin to drop off from west to east as this atmosphere is really overworked.
And usually the best likelihood of seeing a tornado in this kind of situation will be along the leading edge of your first cluster of storms, which passed, let's say, 2 hours ago through Smiths Falls and Perth and along Highway 7. So the chances of you getting, again, back to that surface instability, which you really need to get, yes, to get a funnel cloud, you can still get that embedded in the thunderstorms, but to get anything really extending down to the surface, you need that surface instability. The bottoms of the storms have to be really close to the surface. So if you're concerned of the tornado potential in Smiths Falls, I would say don't let your guard down quite yet, but I think the worst chance is certainly in the rearview mirror right now.
And you mentioned the cloud cover and the base of the clouds. They are actually quite low. We've got quite a saturated air mass at the low levels. So when you're lifting this environment, it is condensing rather low. So that kind of works in a tornadic environment's favor. Dry low levels aren't really conducive to the development of tornadoes. So we are keeping in mind there is a surplus of low-level moisture. Really, the inflow of these thunderstorms have tons of moisture to work with. So that's why localized flooding is also a threat. We're not looking at a tremendous risk for large hail today in these thunderstorms. Typically, you need a little bit more storm instability. We don't have extreme levels of what's known as convective available potential energy. We're working with 500 to 800 joules of energy, which is not strong enough to really build softball-sized hail. So we're not looking at gargantuan large hailstones. Hailstones could potentially still be in that 1 to 2 centimeter range for the most part. Not a primary threat. When you look at the winds aloft, I think the most widespread threat with our risk of thunderstorms today would be straight line winds.
You took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say, we haven't mentioned what we normally talk about is that hail potential. But yes, this is such a low energy situation that you can't keep supporting the hailstones as they grow bigger and bigger. The bigger the hailstone, the more energy you need to keep it up in the air. So not a big likelihood of that. And with you saying how moist the air mass is, the dew points are relatively high, means we're really close to the air even being saturated at the surface. Once you get into some of that clearing through central Ontario, when the sun comes out for 5-10 minutes and you start to see the steam coming off the roads, that really makes it feel a little more muggy, and that is what kind of leads you to believe that yes, the torrential rain will be the main factor moving forward now that the strongest winds have, for the most part, moved into Quebec.
And I know people tune in and out of live streams continuously, so if you're just joining us, we have a tornado watch issued for extreme eastern Ontario. Note the swirl on your screen. That's the precipitation forecast. I don't know, Kevin, if you could throw up a risk map. I think the public kind of is getting used to our risk maps, and it kind of highlights the regions where we are most concerned for a heightened risk of active weather. So we can walk you through the next several hours here and take a look at kind of the areas we pinpointed in terms of our risk. So this is the Environment Canada alerts. We'll start here. That's the tornado watch. That is probably the most important watch besides that tornado warning on your map right now. This is the map behind the scenes that the meteorologist team here at the Weather Network drew up, highlighting that the risk of severe thunderstorms backs all the way back to Kitchener, Guelph, Fergus, not quite London, and then extends essentially along Highway 7, 401, up to 400 to Barrie, then across eastern Ontario. We had an upgrade with our risk products late this morning. We added the risk of 1 or 2 tornadoes. It's kind of a secondary hazard. We didn't intentionally put it, at the top. So we're watching those damaging wind gusts associated with that low-level jet. I think when you look at the power outages impacting Montreal, you're in that severe potential. We just have to continue to be sort of on guard here over the next few hours as we track these thunderstorms as they push further east.
Yeah, all these main hazards, they're not in play for the entire region covered in orange. Back towards the GTA, that part that's in orange, wouldn't necessarily want to take it out of that quite yet, even though the majority of the storm action has moved through. The reason being, we still have to see how these storms start to act over the next couple of hours. When you have low energy, getting the storms initiated is one of the hurdles you have to clear. We can already clear that hurdle. These storms have likely been aided by a little bit of a lake breeze off of Lake Erie and or Georgian Bay, or not Georgian Bay, Lake Huron, as they head towards Georgian Bay. Now they're also moving up in elevation as they approach the escarpment. So we'll see how these storms interact with that additional clearing we've been seeing between Peterborough and Kitchener. So there's going to be more energy for these storms to feed on, but they don't have the good shear that the Eastern Ontario storms. So it's kind of a one side gets one deal, the other side gets another deal, and if you combine those two, then yes, we would be talking about a very heightened situation, but we've avoided that.
That's good news. And what do you think the chances are these thunderstorms in and around Kitchener, Cambridge, Guelph, Fergus, that they make their way once again through the GTA? My drive in to Oakville through late this morning, there was a lot of pooling and ponding. You could tell some of the low-lying areas were overly saturated. We have rainfall reports over the past 12 hours through the Toronto watershed and in around the 20 to 30 millimeter range. So you typically don't get extensive issues there. That's kind of the localized threshold. Once you move above and beyond that 50 millimeter rainfall threshold, Kevin, that's where we start to have significant urban flooding problems where storm drains and the infrastructure simply can't keep up with the deluge of water. So I guess you're looking at a high resolution model here, looking at future precipitation amounts. And it looks like the most part, that's going to be targeting extreme eastern Ontario and southern Quebec.
Yeah, this is good news for the entire concrete jungle of the Golden Horseshoe. It's going to give the roads and everything a chance to kind of catch up over the next couple of hours. Yes, those cells north of London can move towards the north end of the GTA, but we will be in a better position then. The rivers will still be running high, but all the infrastructure will be able to take on the next round of rain. It's going to be more isolated. The first round, everyone was getting rain. This next round, it won't be that situation. You can see all the consistent greens and even darker greens. That will all be between Ottawa and Montreal. Montreal, you'll have it right through the evening. Ottawa, your best chance for the heaviest rain will be just in the next hour or two.
And we've got some great news to report. We don't have a single tornado warning in effect across southern Quebec or eastern Ontario. That has now been dropped. But we are watching just a little pocket of rotation across southern Quebec. So I'm going to try to pinpoint that on the radar. I'm going to use some of the radar products to take a look at where that potentially may be, because anywhere along this boundary is capable for embedded spin-up. So we're not looking at discrete supercells, discrete storms. This looks quite messy, this signature, Kevin. And the downfall with that, it is sometimes difficult to pick up tornadoes in this environment. They're not often to be long track or long-lived tornadoes. Sometimes they'll last as little as 5 minutes. They'll retract quickly. So it's something to keep mindful of as we look at some of this rotation. In and around the Mont-Tremblant region, we're watching little pockets along this boundary as this frontal system continues to lift east.
Yeah, think of all the individual storms along this line. They're not in agreement. They're not marching like soldiers. They're kind of bumping shoulders, but every now and then they are going to bump together and they can combine forces. It works out better, and that's when you can get just the brief rotation. You can get stronger winds. You can get a downburst briefly, but yes, it's tough to, by the time you pick up on that on a radar scan, it's going to be 10 minutes by the time you get another one to see if that's prolonged. Then you got to get the warning issued, and then by the time that's issued, you could already seeing it start to dissipate. So it's a situation that comes down to a small scale, but also a small time frame to try to pinpoint this.
I'd love to get some storm reports if you are in a safe location to do so. I am seeing some very strong winds in the Brockville region. This is aloft. It's a little bit further away from the radar, but I'm seeing potential for 90-kilometer-an-hour winds mixing down on this line, Kevin. In fact, the National Weather Service in upstate New York is issuing severe thunderstorm warnings. Right now, we don't have a single severe thunderstorm warning in effect on this side of the border, but I'm watching some of those systems. That's water down on the east end of Lake Ontario. Those are some potent cells, so they're going to continue to track very, very close to the Brockville, Cornwall region over the next couple hours. I think my eye right now is on that in terms of the highest severe potential being widespread damaging winds along the leading edge of this thunderstorm.
That's good news for anyone driving from west to east. You got a nice tailwind, but I think 90 kilometers an hour might be a little much. But yeah, we're going to continue to see basically the majority energy that Brockville and Cornwall and Prescott are worried about is actually going to be coming in from New York. There's just enough of a southerly component, and as these storms run towards the western side of the Adirondacks, they'll likely have a more northern tendency there. So we'll continue to see even more moisture and likely stronger winds kind of funnel into the 401 corridor and then into Montreal over the next few hours.
And if we take a look at some of our, I think we're seeing some unique maps on our live stream right now. We'll take a look at that feed, but we'll continue to update the storm potential. If you're just joining us, this is a look at the radar across eastern Ontario. So there it is, Ottawa. I'm not sure if we got any heavy rainfall reports. It looks like you're just about to enter round two. Now, round two likely has a very diminished risk of tornadic potential. So keep that in mind. Likely see some of those severe thunderstorm warnings stateside sneak up across the international border. And hopefully we can get through the next couple of hours here unscathed in terms of a tornado report.
Yeah, and we'll see what's in store for the next few hours. So this is now not looking at what's happened over the last couple of hours. This is what the models are predicting moving forward. And you see there's that next line that we're really going to be worried about just in time for the 5 o'clock commute. Ottawa and the 401 both included in that, and that's really your last main threat for Ottawa and Montreal. By the time it gets to Montreal, you're 7 approaching 8 o'clock, so we're almost at sunset. We're getting the last little bit of solar heating. Not much of that again at the surface because you've been under cloud cover essentially all day, certainly all afternoon. And then the cells that you can see trying to gather some independence and some organization for Bancroft, those will quickly die out through 9, 10 o'clock. So Ottawa, you won't have to worry about any nocturnal storms with that. Even the GTA, as those storms we're currently looking at around London, as they continue to try to develop and further intensify over the next couple of hours, they likely won't be doing much in terms of severe potential by the time they cross over the GTA.
Kevin, I don't know if you can show us maybe a future wind gust model or some projections. I'm looking at our risk map, and I think we could make the case to extend the severe potential a little bit further into the heart of Quebec, perhaps up the St. Lawrence, especially through the eastern townships, up towards really almost Quebec City. We see the potential that this could be, quite an impactful event. Quebec, of course, no stranger to damaging winds of events. You go back to the derecho back in a couple years ago where we dealt with that situation. This is by no means those winds. This is about maybe 50% of those wind intensities. So we'll be able to kind of play around with these future wind gust models through Montreal and around eastern Ontario. Even Lake Erie, we're picking up on some strong winds down towards Lake Erie in particular, Kevin.
Yeah, so the thing with the Lake Erie winds, these are all wrapping around the low as a whole. They're not associated with any storms. This is just going to be widespread right across the lake, picking up those big waves. While you see those oranges and reds here in Quebec, you can see the funneling, Burlington, Vermont. That will be some funneling coming off of Lake Champlain. Well, we're not looking at the ideal wind direction to get those to extend into Quebec. So that's good news. You don't have ideal alignment there. But look at all these pockets of red, again, through Monday evening, 8, 7 o'clock. Those will be associated with that last round of thunderstorms. You see all those blues. That is where we're seeing this wind really die out.
Yeah, it's almost like these winds are punching above their weight. You're getting these thunderstorms bringing winds that are normally aloft mixing down to the surface. So you see that in the vicinity of Quebec City, Montreal. Those oranges and reds are gusts easily pushing 80 kilometers an hour. So as they push across in and around eastern townships, that is the risk. So we'll continue to watch localized area of wind damage across the province of Quebec.
Yeah, and this is just another kind of color scheme we have, and different thresholds for the different colors. And you see those oranges right around Burlington and Plattsburgh. Again, those will be funneling out of the mountains and across the lake. But by the time they get into Quebec, they're just down to those greens. That's wind gusts of 40, 50 kilometers per hour. So yeah, it'll be gusty, but it's not going to be taking down power lines and knocking over trees. And on the backside, that's a whole lot of stable air in eastern Ontario, so that's when the winds will really start to calm out for the evening.
And speaking of the evening and beyond, really the only severe weather threat over the course of this week is going to be this evening. We are entering more of a typical pattern, temperatures falling back into the mid to upper teens at times. So this is really the day to watch. If you're just joining our live stream, we had tornado watches issued across eastern Ontario, and in fact, several tornado warnings as well. This was not a confirmed tornado situation, nothing we saw on X or storm spotters. What we saw was possible radar signatures embedded in pockets of rotation, essentially, along these lines. So we're seeing evidence of the tornadic potential diminishing, which is some great news. And you're circling that region in question was the culprit, the couplet that really triggered Environment Canada to be proactive and issue based alone on that radar signature. So that's just something kind of under the hood that the meteorologists are working on behind the scene.
Yeah, now the same region right around Hawkesbury, that is where we have the most impressive reflectivity. So this isn't showing any potential for tornado or wind. This is strictly for your rainfall rates. This will be torrential rainfall, but also have a look at, let's just measure how far across this cell is. You're only looking at about 40 kilometers per hour, and they're moving at about 70 kilometers per hour. So this is only about half an hour, maybe 40 minutes of the heaviest rainfall. So yes, you can quickly get 15, 20 millimeters out of that, but you've already gone through that one. So we'll likely see some localized flooding in far eastern Ontario. And the good news is, yes, so far it has stayed north of the other concrete jungle of Montreal.
And if we're looking at pockets of rotation, most of the focus, so before a tornado couplet develops, we often get a point of convergence, and that's what we're seeing east of Hawkesbury right now. La Chute, Dalesville, Pine Hill, this is all a point of convergence. So this would be a region just east of Hawkesbury where there is the potential to watch this storm develop into a region of concern and perhaps be able to produce a tornado. So that would be really the most ominous sign in terms of tornado potential really all across eastern Ontario and southern Quebec right now.
Yeah, that cell missed Ottawa when it moved across the across 416. But Ottawa, you are now in your next round of the heaviest rain. You had that brief little break there around 2:30, but you're now in it once again. It's going to go back and forth between, let's say, heavy rain and moderate rain for a few times until the backside of the rain, which is in Kingston. That's going to have to move through. Again, you can do a rough timing with that. So you're looking at 150 kilometers. You're looking at likely over 2 hours of heavy rain.
There we go. It's not just a one and done. This is drawn out. And we have a couple questions about the Gatineau-Ottawa region in terms of are they in the risk zone still? When you look at what the atmosphere is doing this very second, Kevin, you know, you've had a lot of experience tracking severe thunderstorms. Is Ottawa at this point in the clear in terms of the severe thunderstorm risk moving forward?
I wouldn't say we're in the clear in Ottawa, specifically because of those winds you were looking at down near Brockville. So if this big cluster can still hold pockets of strong descending air, then Ottawa, you're just as likely to get that, because look at all those pockets of orange between Carleton Place, Smiths Falls, and you have to get back to Charlotte Lake before you get into the breaking. And even back towards Bancroft, yes, you're breaking up with the rain, but this is where you're getting a little bit of sunshine. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see these isolated cells die out, but I would be just as likely to support them continuing to develop over just the next couple of hours, because they do have that little sliver of sunshine and clearing to get even 20, 30 minutes of stability to build can continue to fuel those storms.
Well, there we go. And we are getting some severe thunderstorm warnings across Quebec, St. Jerome area. Environment Canada's tracking strong wind gusts up to nickel-sized hail and heavy rain. So that's their official severe thunderstorm warning summary. So that's the St. Jerome area. No tornado warnings in effect right now, just the tornado watch. We're also under a severe thunderstorm warning that was issued about 15 minutes ago for the Mont-Tremblant region. So this was the region we're kind of looking at where that convergence is, and it has probably the highest likelihood to mix down damaging winds and the slightest risk, maybe put it at 2% of producing a tornado right now.
Yeah, Mount Tremblant, you're at the top end of, let's say, the whole shield of the strongest storm. So it's a tricky area once you get into the Laurentians here, because you can get those local effects just like south of the border in upstate New York. You can get extra lift, you can get extra descending air, and you can get some convergence through there. So right now, it's also looking more clustered up that way, not as well organized and defined as down near Hawkesbury, because it's further away from the radar stations. We don't have great coverage once you get into northern Quebec. So it's not to say there aren't still strong storms around Mount Laurier and Tremblant. It's just that it's not as easily picked up by our radar stations, which are down near Montreal and Ottawa.
And if we take a look back at the Greater Toronto area, we are still trying to dry out from the previous rounds of thunderstorm activity. So we're going to drag back this live radar the past couple hours. It has been an unsettled day. But look at this. The storm continues to pump out thunderstorm activity. We've got little non-severe, almost, it's a cliche, but they're garden variety thunderstorms. That's a bingo card. You've heard that term a few times here at the Weather Network. We're looking at these non-severe pulse-like thunderstorms. They don't have much organization. They're not able to dump down about 50 millimeters of rainfall. Grand Bend is certainly getting in on that action if you reside there. London's been dealing with that. And now Kitchener, Fergus, up towards Highway 10, those regions, Orangeville, you're going to be susceptible to primarily non-severe thunderstorms over the next hour or two at this point.
Yeah, I'm looking at these cells and my initial reaction is the one over Grand Bend, it's still going to be driven mostly to the east, but as it gets away from the help of the Lake Huron shoreline, I wouldn't be surprised to see it start to die, but the one out ahead of it, it's going to still feed on all that instability that's been growing over the last 2 hours between Kitchener, Fergus, and Orangeville. So we'll mainly watch that cluster for the best potential to further develop because we're watching much the same situation. Let's see if it's still in our time frame. Look at the southern shore of Lake Erie. If you've ever driven along I-90 in the winter, it can be pretty tough with the lake effect, but it can be just as tough with the severe thunderstorms that can get initiated along, yes, the lake shoreline, but also there's a pretty impressive escarpment there. So these storms are likely going to continue to develop for Erie to Dunkirk and Buffalo, but we don't have that same situation along the Lake Erie and Huron shoreline on the Canadian side of the border. Also, an area that almost like a secondary little tornado alley in southern Ontario
Ooh.
is Midling, Collingwood, Barrie, where you get those local effects of different winds converging off of Lake Simcoe, Georgian Bay. You have the escarpment, you have the Oro-Medonte elevation influence. So you can get a little bowl there. The good news is we aren't having any storms heading into that kind of cauldron of ingredients. This line that's going right through Muskoka right now, it's hot on the heels of the last bit of rain that's currently sitting around the center of the low between Huntsville and North Bay. So we'll continue to watch that quick line, but the good news is, yes, it's an elongated little storm there, but it's moving perpendicular to its structure. So you're not going to see any training action with these storms. So that's a saving grace for all of cottage country.
What an active day. If you've just joined us, we still have a tornado watch issued across eastern Ontario. Southern Quebec has severe thunderstorm warnings in and around Saint Jerome, Mont Tremblant, as that leading edge of the frontal system and this Colorado low continues to cause damaging winds. And I know I called the storms back towards southwestern Ontario garden variety. I might have to apologize to one of those storms, Kevin, because I'm noticing a little bit of a wind signature in and around the Mitchell region. If you play that radar out, it's actually able to punch above its weight. So watch this low pressure system develop. I'm seeing just a burst of wind on some of these cells. So that is something that we are going to continue to highlight along this region and across eastern Ontario. It seems like these thunderstorms are quite efficient at mixing down some of those stronger winds just off the surface. I don't know if you looked up today at the clouds. I often call it time-lapse sky. You can see the low-level jet and moisture. When you see those clouds roaring by at 80, 90, 100 plus kilometers an hour, it gives you a heads up that some of those wind gusts could mix down to the surface. So that's what we're kind of seeing in that region. Very localized storm activity right now. So let's just watch that Mitchell cell. It's not severe thunderstorm warned right now. It's just producing locally some strong wind gusts just north of Stratford and Mitchell.
And there'll be a better likelihood in the coming, let's say, half hour or so for those stronger winds to be able to mix down to the surface. As the cells get further away from Lake Huron, it's getting away from that stable air mass that's parallel to the shoreline, which is pretty tough air to punch down through. So once they get into air that's a little more unsettled at the surface, there's a better chance for some of those stronger wind gusts, possibly severe level if we could get any warnings over the next hour or so towards Kitchener and Waterloo.
There we go. Okay, a new question in for a region we haven't covered all that much, so just east of the Greater Toronto Area. Let's talk about Peterborough. Laura is asking on our YouTube live stream comment section, what's the situation like in the Peterborough region? Kevin, over the next couple hours, do you see any really ominous thunderstorm threats building?
Well, the good news is you had the worst rain go to the north of you, and right now the heaviest rain is to the east of you, but you are in that clearing area. So let's go back to what we haven't looked at in a bit, is the instability with our cloud cover. So the best energy is still on the west side of the GTA. So Peterborough, any storms that have initiated will remain to the west. By the time they get to you, they'll likely lose the majority of their thunderstorm characteristics, let alone their severe characteristics.
Well, there we go. We will be doing this live stream event multiple times, especially when there is tornado watches issued by Environment Canada. It's going to be a long summer. We are going to release our summer forecast this week. That is going to have a lot of the details, and we'll actually dive in exclusively on the severe weather risk coast to coast in terms of that activity for the summer 2024 season.
Yeah, this is the time of year I think the majority of Canadians love the most, but to get the warmth and the great beach weather, you have to deal with those storms, whether you're in Ontario, Quebec, Alberta, Saskatchewan. The best seasons for severe weather, whether you like it or not, are just around the corner.
Take these warnings seriously through the remainder of this afternoon. We'll continue our coverage on our TV channel over the hours ahead.